Welcome to this journey through one of the most unsettling cases recorded in the history of Oklahoma. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing to which places and at what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. The year was 1911. Oklahoma had only recently become the 46th state of the Union, joining just 4 years prior. The land was still raw from its violent birth, first as Indian territory, then open to white settlers during the land runs. Towns sprouted like weeds along newly laid railroad tracks, and fortunes were made and lost overnight in oil fields and cattle ranches. It was a time of transition when the wild frontier was reluctantly giving way to civilization, but not without resistance. In these spaces between order and chaos, strange things could happen without notice or consequence. Among the rolling hills of Pawnee County, approximately 12 miles northeast of the small but growing town of Pawnee, stood a 2-story farmhouse that locals simply called the Carter Place. It sat alone at the end of a winding dirt road, partially hidden by a stand of blackjack oak trees. The nearest neighbor was over 3 miles away. Not unusual for the time and place, but notable for what would later transpire there. The house itself was unremarkable. Whitewashed clapboard siding that had faded to a dull gray, a steep pitched roof with a single brick chimney, and a wide front porch where travelers often rested before continuing their journeys. The house belonged to 2 cousins, Elias and Samuel Carter, who had arrived from Tennessee sometime around 1908, according to county records. They established what appeared to be a modest but respectable business offering lodging to cattle drivers, land agents, and various travelers making their way through what was still referred to by many as Indian territory. The cousins kept to themselves, were said to be courteous if somewhat reserved, and attended the Methodist church in town with enough regularity to avoid suspicion. According to church records, Elias occasionally contributed to the collection plate, though Samuel was noted by the pastor as being less forthcoming with charitable contributions. What made the Carter place somewhat unusual was that neither cousin had brought a wife or children with them from Tennessee. 2 bachelor men running a boarding house was uncommon enough to raise eyebrows, but not enough to cause alarm. They explained that they had come west following the deaths of their respective spouses, seeking a fresh start away from painful memories. Samuel told people his wife had died of tuberculosis, while Elias was more reticent about his loss, saying only that God's ways are mysterious and sometimes cruel. The townsfolk of Pawnee, many of whom had come west to escape their own troubles, respected the cousins' apparent grief and asked few questions. According to what limited documentation survives, the Carter cousins' establishment saw a steady stream of guests from 1908 through early 1911. Most were single men, cattle drivers, oil field workers, and land speculators. The Carters charged reasonable rates and were known to offer a hot meal and strong coffee. The house had 4 guest rooms upstairs, with the cousins occupying 2 rooms on the main floor. A small outbuilding served as a stable for guests' horses, and a well-tended vegetable garden provided fresh produce for the boarding house table. What makes this case particularly disturbing is not what was known about the Carter cousins during their time in Pawnee County, but what wasn't discovered until years later. For behind their unassuming facade of rural hospitality lay a secret so dark and so methodical that it would shake the community to its core when finally revealed. On April 17, 1911, a cattle buyer from Kansas City named Lawrence Merrick checked into the Carter place. According to the register book later found by authorities, Merrick was the only guest that night. He had traveled to Oklahoma to purchase a herd of longhorns for a wealthy rancher in Missouri, and was carrying a significant sum of money, though this detail was known only to his business partners. He was expected in Oklahoma City 3 days later for an important meeting with investors. He never arrived. Merrick's business partners, concerned about both the man and the considerable funds entrusted to him, telegraphed the sheriff in Pawnee, inquiring about the man's whereabouts. The telegram, preserved in county records, expressed increasing alarm. Merrick overdue. Stop no word received. Stop reliable man. Not prone to delay. Stop request immediate inquiry. Stop. Sheriff William Tatum, a former Texas Ranger who had moved to Oklahoma following the land run of 1893, rode out to the Carter place on April 22nd, only to find the house completely abandoned. According to his written report, filed 2 days later, the scene was deeply troubling. Dishes sat unwashed in the kitchen sink. A pot of beans had boiled dry on the stove, the bottom scorched black. The cousins' personal belongings appeared to be mostly intact. Clothing still hung in wardrobes, and family photographs still adorned the mantelpiece. A Bible lay open on the small table in the parlor, the pages turned to the Book of Revelation. Most concerning of all, Lawrence Merrick's suitcase was found in one of the upstairs bedrooms, his shaving kit laid out neatly on the washstand, as if he had been interrupted mid-routine. His wallet containing $43 and a photograph of a woman, presumed to be his wife, was found in the breast pocket of a jacket hanging on a bedpost. The large sum of money he was reportedly carrying for cattle purchases was nowhere to be found. Sheriff Tatum, disturbed by the signs of hasty departure, organized a search of the surrounding area. Deputies and volunteers combed the woods around the property, checked abandoned mines and wells, and dragged the creek that ran a quarter-mile behind the house. No bodies were found, no blood evidence was discovered, and no signs of struggle were apparent in the house. The Carter cousins' wagon and 2 horses were missing from the barn, suggesting they had departed voluntarily. But the circumstances were deeply suspicious. A telegram was sent to authorities in Franklin County, Tennessee, seeking information about the cousins' backgrounds. The response would chill the small community of Pawnee to its core. No one by the names of Elias or Samuel Carter matching their descriptions was known to have lived in the county from which they claimed to hail. Church records showed no marriages or deaths corresponding to their stories. The land deed they had presented to the Pawnee County clerk, supposedly showing the sale of a family farm in Tennessee that had financed their purchase in Oklahoma, was revealed to be a clever forgery. For nearly 6 years, the disappearance of Lawrence Merrick and the Carter cousins remained an unsolved mystery. The Carter place stood empty, the subject of local superstition and rumor. Children dared each other to approach the house after dark. Local farmers refused to purchase the property despite its fertile soil and reasonable asking price. A traveling salesman who spent a night in the abandoned house on a bet claimed to have heard the sound of something heavy being dragged across the floor, though he was known to be fond of whiskey and tall tales. In December of 1917, a severe winter storm damaged the roof of the Carter place. The county had taken possession of the property for unpaid taxes, and a work crew was dispatched to make repairs before putting the house up for auction in the spring. What they discovered in the cellar would reveal the true horror of the Carter place and forever change how the people of Pawnee County viewed their community and their neighbors. While shoring up a sagging support beam, workers removed several loose floorboards in the cellar. One of the men, James Wilson, later recalled noticing that the dirt floor beneath the boards seemed unnaturally compacted, as if it had been repeatedly disturbed and tamped down. Upon further investigation, the workers found a small hidden chamber, approximately 6 feet deep and 8 feet square. Inside were the remains of what would eventually be identified as 11 individuals. Some had been there for what appeared to be several years, based on the condition of the remains. Wilson's statement to authorities, preserved in the county archives, described the moment of discovery in stark terms. It was like looking into the mouth of hell itself. They were stacked neat, almost respectful-like, but there was nothing respectful. about what had been done to them. I've butchered hogs most of my life, but I never seen human beings laid out like that. Made me sick to my stomach, and Matthew's there, he ain't been right in the head since. Among the personal effects found with the bodies was a distinctive gold pocket watch that was later identified by Merrick's widow as belonging to her husband. The timepiece had been a wedding gift from her father and bore a unique engraving of a sailing ship on its cover. The other victims could not be identified with certainty, though missing persons reports from the surrounding counties suggested possible matches for several of them. A silver belt buckle with the initials TB likely belonged to Thomas Blackwood, a cattle buyer reported missing in 1909. A monogrammed handkerchief with the letters JWS corresponded to a land surveyor named James Sutton, who had last been seen heading toward Pawnee County in early 1910. The most disturbing aspect of the discovery was not merely the number of victims, but the methodical, almost ritualistic manner in which they had been arranged in the chamber. Each body had been carefully positioned facing east, with hands crossed. Over the chest, small personal objects, a pipe, a comb, a handkerchief, had been placed with apparent care beside each victim. According to the workers who made the discovery, the scene resembled a heathen burial ground more than a hasty disposal of murder victims. Dr. James Harrington, the county physician who examined the remains, noted in his report that all victims appeared to have died from the same cause. A precise incision at the base of the skull that would have severed the spinal cord. The cut was so clean and uniform across all victims that Dr. Harrington concluded it must have been performed with a specialized tool, possibly a narrow-bladed butcher's knife or medical instrument. There were no signs of other violence, no defensive wounds, no indications of restraint or struggle. This suggested the victims were either killed while unaware of the danger or had been subdued through other means before the fatal wound was inflicted. Even more unsettling was Dr. Harrington's observation that the skill evidenced in the fatal wounds suggested the killer or killers had considerable anatomical knowledge or practice. In his official report, dated January 3, 1918, Dr. Harrington wrote, "The perpetrator demonstrates an understanding of human anatomy that exceeds that of the common man. The precision of the fatal wounds suggests either medical training or considerable experience in slaughter, perhaps of livestock. In each case, death would have been nearly instantaneous with minimal suffering, a fact that somehow makes these killings all the more disturbing, as it implies a clinical detachment rather than passionate rage. A statewide manhunt for the Carter cousins ensued, but no trace of them was ever found. Their true identities remained a mystery. Were they even cousins at all? Were they actually from Tennessee? Had they fled west after similar crimes elsewhere? These questions haunted investigators and the community alike. Wanted posters bearing their likenesses from a church directory photograph were distributed throughout Oklahoma, Texas, and neighboring states. Railroad agents and stagecoach drivers were instructed to be on the lookout for the men, but no confirmed sightings were ever reported. The case took another unexpected turn in February of 1918 when authorities received a letter from a woman in Joplin, Missouri, claiming to be the sister of Samuel Carter. Written in an elegant, educated hand on quality stationery, the letter presented a very different picture of the cousins than the one emerging from the investigation. According to her account, her brother and cousin had indeed moved west from Tennessee, but they had been gentle, God-fearing men incapable of such atrocities. She suggested that they themselves might have fallen victim to whatever evil had befallen their lodgers. The letter, which was signed only with the initial E, contained details about the cousins that could not have been widely known, childhood ailments, family traditions, even the name of Samuel's dog from boyhood. This lent credibility to the writer's claim of kinship, yet the letter carefully avoided providing any verifiable facts about the family's origins or current whereabouts. Most disturbing was the postscript added in a different ink, as if an afterthought. They always believed the soul could be seen at the moment of passing. Perhaps they found what they were looking for. Investigators from the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation traveled to the small mining town of Joplin to interview the woman, only to find that she had vacated her rented room the day before their arrival. Neighbors described her as quiet and somewhat odd, having arrived in town just 3 weeks earlier. She had told people she was a widow waiting for her brother to send for her. No one knew where she had gone. The landlady recalled only that she had eyes that seemed to look right through you, and that she often sat for hours staring at nothing in particular, as if listening to sounds no one else could hear. The question of what truly happened at the Carter place might have remained entirely in the realm of speculation were it not for the discovery made in 1937, when the property was finally being demolished to make way for a new county road. Workers uncovered a metal box that had been sealed inside the chimney masonry. Inside was a leather-bound journal. The journal was attributed to Elias Carter, though given what we now know about the cousins' false identities, this authorship cannot be verified with certainty. The contents, however, provide a disturbing glimpse into the mind of whoever operated the deadly boarding house in Pawnee County. The entries begin in 1907, predating the cousins' arrival in Oklahoma. They detail a philosophy so twisted and yet articulated with such clarity that the county attorney who first read the journal reportedly could not sleep for days afterward. He later requested a transfer to another jurisdiction, citing the need to be closer to aging parents, but colleagues noted that he was never the same after reading the Carter Journal. According to the journal, the author believed that the human soul could only achieve true liberation at the exact moment between life and death. He had developed what he called the method to capture this moment, claiming that by severing the connection between brain and body in a precise manner, he could witness the soul's departure. The journal contains repeated references to the light that supposedly emanated from the eyes of the dying in their final seconds of life, a light that the author claimed contained all the wisdom of the universe, all the secrets of God himself. Most disturbing were the clinical, dispassionate descriptions of the victim's final moments. The author noted minute changes in facial expressions, pupil dilation, and even the temperature of the skin as life left the body. He recorded these observations with the detachment of a scientist, occasionally expressing disappointment when the results did not meet his expectations. There was no remorse, no acknowledgement of the humanity of the victims, only a cold curiosity about the mechanics of death and what might lie beyond. One entry, dated April 18, 1911, the day after Lawrence Merrick checked in, reads, "Subject exhibited unusual awareness in the final moment. Eyes remained fixed on mine, even as the method was applied. For 3.5 seconds after severance, conscious recognition was maintained. The most promising result thus far." Samuel disagrees with my assessment, claiming it was merely muscular reflex, but he did not observe as closely as I did. The subject seemed to understand what was happening, even after it should have been impossible. There was knowledge in his gaze, not fear, not accusation, but understanding. He saw what I have been seeking all these years. The journal makes reference to similar experiments conducted in Tennessee, Missouri, and possibly other locations, suggesting that the Carter cousins had left a trail of victims across multiple states. It mentions a boarding house near Nashville, where they had hosted 7 subjects of varying quality before suspicion forced them to move on. It refers to a farm outside St. Louis where we perfected the method with the help of 4 railroad workers who sought shelter during a storm. These casual references to previous murders suggest a death toll far higher than the 11 victims found beneath the Pawnee County farmhouse. The journal also mentions a sister, referred to only as E, who shared their beliefs and had assisted, them on at least one occasion. According to one entry dated November 1909, she has a steadier hand than Samuel and a clearer eye for the moment of transition. Her observations regarding the Richardson subject proved more accurate than either of ours. This suggests that a third member of the family was actively involved in at least some of the killings, a chilling prospect that raises questions about how many others might have participated in or known about the Carter cousins' activities. The final entry in the journal is dated April 30th, 1911, more than a week after Sheriff Tatum's visit to the abandoned farmhouse. It reads simply, "We continue west. The work remains unfinished. What we have learned must be preserved and expanded. Upon Samuel believes California would provide suitable conditions, isolated properties, transient populations, minimal official curiosity. I concur. E will join us when arrangements are complete. The light awaits." No confirmed sightings of the Carter cousins were ever reported after their disappearance from Oklahoma. However, between 1912 and 1928, authorities in New Mexico, Arizona, and finally Northern California investigated a series of disappearances with similarities to the Pawnee County case. In each instance, travelers vanished after staying at remote boarding houses operated by a pair of men described as possibly being brothers or cousins. By the time authorities connected these cases to the Carter cousins, the trail had gone cold. Whether these disappearances were the work of the Carters or merely coincidental cannot be determined with certainty. In 1942, an elderly man in a San Francisco hospital made a deathbed confession to a Catholic priest, claiming to be Samuel Carter. According to secondhand accounts from hospital staff, the man spoke of dozens of victims across 5 states and described his cousin Elias as a man who believed he could capture the moment when the soul leaves the body. He reportedly told the priest that they had continued their work in California for many years, focusing particularly on migrant workers during the Great Depression, people who would not be missed and whose disappearances would not prompt investigation. According to hospital records, the man died of tuberculosis before authorities could question him, and the priest maintained the sanctity of the confessional, refusing to confirm specific details beyond acknowledging that a confession had taken place. Whether this man was truly Samuel Carter remains impossible to verify. The description provided by hospital staff, a tall, thin man with a distinctive scar across the back of his right hand, does match the limited physical description of Samuel Carter from Pawnee County records. However, in the absence of photographs or fingerprints, positive identification was impossible. The case of the Carter Place killings officially remains unsolved. The house itself is long gone, though the foundation stones can still be seen in what is now a small roadside rest area on State Highway 18. Local residents claim that flowers occasionally appear at the site, left by an unknown visitor. Some speculate it could be descendants of victims seeking closure. Others wonder if it might be someone else, someone with knowledge of what truly happened there, or perhaps even a connection to the perpetrators themselves. The flowers are always the same, white lilies with their stems cut at an angle, arranged in a precise circle. According to the journal found in the chimney, white lilies were Elias Carter's favorite flower, a detail known to very few. In 1968, a doctoral student in criminal psychology at the University of Oklahoma attempted to reopen the investigation, believing that modern forensic techniques might reveal new information about the victims and possibly help track the movements of the Carter cousins after they fled Oklahoma. The student, Michael Brennan, spent several months researching the case, interviewing elderly residents who remembered the discovery of the bodies and examining the physical evidence still preserved in county archives. According to university records, Brennan abandoned the project abruptly after traveling to Pawnee County to visit the former site of the Carter Place. His thesis advisor reported receiving a brief note stating only that some doors should remain closed. The student's research materials were archived and later lost during a department relocation in the early 1970s. Attempts to contact Brennan in subsequent years proved unsuccessful. His last known address was in Northern California, where he reportedly worked as a groundskeeper at a small private cemetery. Today, more than a century after the horrors of the Carter Place, the case stands as one of the earliest documented examples of serial murder in Oklahoma's history. The question of how many travelers met their end at the hands of the Carter cousins and whether their killing spree continued elsewhere under different names may never be fully answered. The 11 victims found beneath the farmhouse floor represent only those who were killed at that location. If the journal entries and the deathbed confession are to be believed, the true number of their victims may be several times higher. Perhaps most unsettling is the possibility that they were not alone in their murderous philosophy. The mysterious sister mentioned in the journal, the woman who appeared briefly in Missouri claiming relation to the killers, and the unknown visitor who allegedly leaves flowers at the site. These suggest a legacy that may have continued long after the disappearance of the Carter cousins themselves. Could their beliefs have been passed down to others? Might there be those who, even today, pursue the light that Elias Carter claimed to see in the eyes of the dying? In the years following the discovery of the victims, several families came forward believing their missing loved ones might have been among those found beneath the Carter Place. Most had been searching for fathers, brothers, or sons who had traveled to Oklahoma seeking work in the oil fields or cattle industry. The pain of not knowing, of having no body to bury and no grave to visit, haunted these families for generations. DNA testing was not available at the time, and the remains were eventually interred in a common grave in the Pawnee Cemetery, marked only by a small stone reading, "Unknown souls, rest in peace." One such family was that of Thomas Blackwood, a cattle buyer from Missouri who disappeared in 1909 after writing to his wife that he would be staying at a quiet boarding house run by 2 cousins from Tennessee. Blackwood's final letter, now preserved in the Oklahoma Historical Society archives, contains a chilling postscript. The elder cousin Elias is a curious sort, watches me in a way that makes me uneasy, says he's interested in philosophy and the nature of the soul. Strange conversation for a boarding house proprietor. Will be glad to be on my way tomorrow. Blackwood's grandson, interviewed for a local newspaper in 1962, recalled how his grandmother kept her husband's shaving kit on her dresser until the day she died, convinced he would eventually return home. She would talk to it sometimes, he told the reporter. Late at night, I'd hear her telling him about her day, about how the children were growing, about how much she missed him. She never accepted that he was gone. When they found those bodies in Oklahoma, she wrote to the sheriff, but they couldn't tell her for certain if my grandfather was among them. Not knowing was a wound that never healed. The Carter case also raises disturbing questions about how many other travelers might have disappeared along the lonely roads of early Oklahoma without anyone reporting them missing, in an era before telephones were common, before highways connected towns, and before standardized record-keeping. A person could vanish without immediate alarm. How many other victims might there have been whose disappearances were never connected to the Carter cousins? How many families never knew what became of their loved ones who set out for the frontier and simply never returned? Sheriff William A. Tatum, who discovered the abandoned farmhouse in 1911, remained haunted by the case for the rest of his life. According to county records, he continued to investigate leads related to the Carter cousins long after he retired from law enforcement in 1919. His personal papers, donated to the County Historical Society after his death in 1932, reveal a man obsessed with finding answers. Maps marked with possible sightings of the cousins, letters to law enforcement agencies across the western states, and notes on similar disappearances elsewhere suggest that Tatum devoted much of his retirement to pursuing the Carters. His granddaughter, interviewed for a Historical Society publication in 1965, revealed that Tatum kept the journal found in the chimney locked in his desk drawer long after he should have surrendered it as evidence. He would read it again and again, she recalled, trying to understand how men could do such things. He never found an answer that satisfied him. In his final years, he would sometimes wake in the night calling out names: Lawrence Merrick, Thomas Blackwood, others I didn't recognize. I think those men, the ones who died at the Carter place, haunted him until the end. The land where the Carter place once stood has changed hands many times over the decades. Local legend holds that crops planted there yield poorly, that livestock become agitated when pastured on the site. Whether these tales reflect actual phenomena or simply the power of dark history to color perception remains an open question. A geologist who surveyed the area in the 1950s found nothing unusual about the soil composition or any other physical characteristics that might explain the reported agricultural difficulties. Nevertheless, the property has remained largely unused, except as grazing land, with no permanent structures built on the site of the original farmhouse. In 1952, a family that had purchased the land without knowing its history reportedly abandoned their newly built home after less than 3 months of residence. The house, constructed approximately 50 yards from where the Carter place had stood, was left with furniture and personal belongings still inside, a haunting echo of the original abandonment 4 decades earlier. County records indicate they sold the property at a significant loss. When questioned by a local reporter, the former owner would say only that the place didn't feel right and refused further comment. The house remained empty for several years before burning down under mysterious circumstances in 1956. The fire marshal's report listed the cause as undetermined, though local rumor suggested arson, possibly as an attempt to cleanse the property of its dark associations. The most recent documented strange occurrence connected to the Carter case came in 1967 when road workers widening the highway near the former site of the farmhouse uncovered a small metal box buried several feet below ground. Inside was a woman's locket containing a photograph of a man believed to be Elias Carter based on comparisons to the single known photograph of him from a Pawnee County church directory. The locket also contained a lock of hair and a small piece of paper with the words, "He sees the moment," written in faded ink. The identity of the locket's owner remains unknown. Was it a keepsake belonging to the mysterious sister mentioned in the journal? Was it a token taken from a victim? Or could it have been something else entirely? Evidence of a relationship or connection not documented in the official record. The locket was cataloged as evidence and stored in the county sheriff's office until a reorganization in 1978, at which point it reportedly went missing. No record exists of it being signed out or transferred, leading some to speculate that it was stolen, though by whom and for what purpose remains unknown. Whatever the truth, the case of the Carter cousins serves as a chilling reminder of the darkness that sometimes hides behind ordinary facades. 2 quiet men running a boarding house in rural Oklahoma, men who attended church, who nodded politely to neighbors in town, who kept their property neat and their business affairs in order, harbored within themselves a philosophy of murder, so calculated and so methodical that it defies conventional understanding. The journal entries suggest a worldview that combined religious fervor with a perverted scientific curiosity. Elias Carter apparently believed he was conducting important research into the nature of the human soul, seeing his victims not as people, but as subjects in a grand experiment. This ability to dehumanize others, to reduce living beings to objects of study, lies at the heart of many of history's darkest chapters. What makes the Carter case particularly disturbing is the intimate scale of their crimes, not mass murder, directed from afar, but killings carried out face to face in the quiet isolation of a farmhouse bedroom. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the case is not what we know, but what we don't. The final words in Elias Carter's journal: We continue west. The work remains unfinished, suggests that the horror did not end when the cousins fled. Pawnee County. How many more travelers met their fate at the hands of these killers as they moved west? How many more hidden chambers might exist, undiscovered, beneath other remote boarding houses along the migration routes of early 20th century America? And what of the sister, the mysterious E, mentioned in the journal? Did she join them in their westward journey? Did she continue their work after they were gone? The flowers that occasionally appear at the site of the former Carter place, could they be left by someone who carries not grief, but the terrible legacy of the Carter family? In 1959, a woman matching the general description of the person who had claimed to be Samuel Carter's sister was briefly detained by police in Portland, Oregon, after being found trespassing in a cemetery after hours. According to the arrest report, she told officers she was visiting family, though no graves bearing the Carter name existed in the cemetery. She provided a name and address that later proved to be false and was released after paying a small fine. A routine photograph taken during booking shows a tall, thin woman with striking pale eyes and white hair pulled back in a severe bun. When this photograph was later compared to descriptions of E from Missouri witnesses, several points of similarity were noted. However, the woman disappeared before she could be questioned further, and no additional sightings were ever confirmed. These questions echo across the decades, unanswered and perhaps unanswerable. The case files gather dust in county archives. The newspaper accounts fade on microfilm reels. The memories dim with each passing generation. But somewhere, perhaps, the truth remains, buried like the victims of the Carter place, waiting to be uncovered. One final disturbing detail emerged in 1964, when a retired doctor from California contacted Oklahoma authorities after reading about the Carter case in a true crime magazine. Dr. Robert Wheaton claimed that in the late 1920s he had treated 2 men matching the Carters' descriptions for minor ailments at his practice in Mendocino County. What had stuck in his memory was a peculiar philosophical discussion initiated by the older of the 2 men, a discussion about the moment of death and whether the human soul could be observed leaving the body. At the time, Dr. Wheaton had assumed the man was speaking theoretically, perhaps working on a book of some kind. It was only decades later, upon reading about the Carter case, that he connected the strange conversation with the murders in Oklahoma. According to Dr. Wheaton's statement, the men had operated a small guest house on an isolated stretch of coastline north of Fort Bragg. When he mentioned to his wife that he found the men unsettling, she chided him for being judgmental. The guest house reportedly burned down in 1931, and the men were believed to have perished in the fire, though no bodies were ever recovered. Local authorities dismissed the connection as speculative, and no formal investigation was conducted, partly due to the passage of time and partly due to jurisdictional complications. Whether these men were indeed the Carter cousins remains unproven, but the philosophical interests described by Dr. Wheaton align disturbingly well with the beliefs expressed in Elias Carter's journal. As darkness falls on the rolling hills of Pawnee County, as wind whispers through the blackjack oaks that still stand near the site of that terrible farmhouse, one can't help but wonder, did the Carter cousins really disappear, or did they simply become someone else, somewhere else, continuing their work under new identities? And if the sister mentioned in the journal truly existed, what became of her? These shadows stretch long across the years, reminding us that some mysteries may be better left unsolved. For in solving them, we risk understanding minds that should perhaps remain incomprehensible. As the student researcher wrote before abandoning his study of the case, some doors should remain closed. The horror of the Carter place may lie not in what happened there, but in the possibility that we might recognize something of ourselves in those who committed such atrocities. A curiosity about death, a fascination with the boundary between life and what lies beyond, a willingness to transgress the most fundamental taboos in pursuit of forbidden knowledge. In 1963, a psychology professor from the University of California wrote a paper analyzing what little was known of Elias Carter's beliefs based on the journal excerpts that had been made public. Dr. Elizabeth Mercer suggested that Carter may have suffered from a form of religious mania combined with what we would now recognize as psychopathic traits, the ability to appear normal while lacking fundamental human empathy. What makes the Carter case so disturbing, she wrote, is that their madness had a method, their violence, a purpose. They killed not from rage or sexual impulse, but from a distorted intellectual curiosity. In their minds, they were not murderers, but researchers, pioneers, mapping the boundary between life and death. Dr. Mercer's paper was controversial, with some colleagues accusing her of sensationalizing an already lurid case. She defended her work as a necessary examination of how rational thinking can become corrupted in service of irrational beliefs. The Carter's logic, however twisted, followed a consistent internal structure, she argued. They had constructed an entire philosophical framework to justify their actions. This should serve as a warning that evil does not always appear as chaos or frenzy. Sometimes it wears the mask of reasoned inquiry. Today, the site where 11 known victims spent their final moments is marked only by a small historical plaque that makes no mention of murder. It references only a historic way station for travelers that once stood on the spot. Perhaps this sanitization of history is for the best, or perhaps it only ensures that unwary travelers remain ignorant of the darkness that once dwelled there and may dwell there still, in memory, if nothing else. Each year on April 17th, the anniversary of Lawrence Merrick's check-in at the Carter Place, a small ceremony is held at the Pawnee Cemetery where the unidentified victims are buried. Organized by the County Historical Society, the gathering is attended mostly by elderly residents and a few true crime enthusiasts who have discovered the case through books or internet forums. Prayers are said, flowers are laid, and the names of the few identified victims are read aloud. For those whose identities remain unknown, there is only silence, a fitting memorial, perhaps, for people who disappeared into silence over a century ago. The case of the Carter cousins reminds us that evil rarely announces itself. It doesn't arrive bearing horns and a pitchfork. It comes as a soft-spoken man offering a clean bed and a hot meal to weary travelers. It comes as a farmhouse at the end of a long road. It comes as curiosity unchecked by conscience. And sometimes it simply comes as two cousins from Tennessee looking to make a fresh start in the newly formed state of Oklahoma. Perhaps the most profound question raised by the Carter case is not who the cousins really were, or how many they killed, or even where they went after fleeing Oklahoma. The most disturbing question is how such methodical evil could exist alongside ordinary life. How the same hands that shook those of neighbors after Sunday services could methodically end lives in pursuit of a twisted philosophy. It reminds us that the boundary between civilized behavior and primal darkness may be thinner than we care to admit. In the words of Sheriff William Tatum, written in his private journal a year before his death, "I have looked for monsters my entire life, first as a Texas Ranger and then as sheriff. What I learned at the Carter place is that monsters don't look like monsters at all. They look like your neighbor, your doctor, your friend. They sit across from you at dinner and pass the salt when asked. That is the true horror, not that monsters exist, but that they walk among us unrecognized until it's too late." In 2003, a descendant of Lawrence Merrick visited the site of the Carter Place. Mary Merrick Jenkins, his great-granddaughter, had grown up hearing stories about her. ancestor who had disappeared in Oklahoma. She later wrote about the experience in a local historical journal. Standing there, where it all happened, I felt nothing extraordinary, no chill, no sense of lingering evil, just the wind and the sound of traffic on the highway. Perhaps that's the most unnerving thing about places where terrible events occurred. They don't echo with screams or whispers. They look like anywhere else. The horror exists, not in the land, but in what people brought to it and what they did there. The Carter case presents a particular challenge to our understanding of criminal psychology. Unlike many serial killers who are driven by sexual impulses, rage, or a desire for control, the Carters appear to have been motivated by a distorted intellectual and spiritual quest. Their belief that they could observe the human soul at the moment of death represents a perversion of both scientific inquiry and religious contemplation. They created an entire cosmology in which murder was not merely justified but necessary, a means of accessing profound truths supposedly hidden from ordinary experience. This philosophical dimension sets the Carter killings apart from many other multiple murder cases of the era. They were not acting from passion or compulsion, but from conviction, a belief system so thoroughly developed that it overrode normals, human empathy, and moral restraint. As noted criminologist Dr. James Reinhart observed in a 1972 analysis of the case, the Carters represent a dangerous convergence of religious fervor and pseudo-scientific curiosity. They killed not in spite of moral principles, but because of them. They had simply constructed a moral universe in which murder served a higher purpose. The journal recovered from the chimney contains several passages suggesting that Elias Carter viewed himself as something of a pioneer or martyr, willing to transgress earthly laws in service of a greater truth. Society's restrictions are for those who cannot see beyond the veil, he wrote in one entry dated September 1909. What appears as sin to the unenlightened is revealed as necessity to those who truly seek understanding. One day, when the full fruit of our research is made known, we will be vindicated. Until then, secrecy is our refuge and patience our companion. This grandiose sense of purpose, this belief in a special destiny or calling, is common among cult leaders and religious extremists. What makes the Carter case unusual is that this messianic conviction was apparently shared by at least 3 family members and directed toward such a specific and horrific end. They had created, in essence, a micro-cult devoted to murder as spiritual practice. The question of whether the Carters found what they were looking for, whether they truly believed they had witnessed the soul departing at the moment of death, remains unanswered. The journal entries suggest a continuing dissatisfaction, a sense that each killing brought them closer to some revelation that remained just out of reach. On Subject 9 showed the most promise yet, reads an entry from February 1910. The light lingered for nearly 4 seconds, and I detected what might have been pattern rather than mere illumination. Samuel remains skeptical, but even he admitted that this subject was different. We must refine our methods further. This perpetual pursuit, this sense that the next victim might finally yield the understanding they sought, may explain the apparent compulsion to continue killing despite the increasing risks. Like gamblers convinced that the next hand will bring the jackpot, the Carters seem to have been addicted to their own quest, unable to stop even when prudence dictated flight. The role of the sister, the mysterious E, introduces another disturbing element to the case. While female serial killers are less common than their male counterparts, they are by no means unprecedented. What makes E's involvement notable is her apparent intellectual partnership in the killings. According to the journal, she was not merely an accomplice or follower, but an active participant who sometimes demonstrated greater insight or skill than her male relatives. One passage, dated December 1909, reads, "E's suggestion regarding the position of the subject proved invaluable. By elevating the head precisely 15 degrees, the moment of transition became much more distinct. Her intuition in these matters sometimes exceeds my methodical approach, though I am loath to admit it to Samuel, who already defers to her too readily in my estimation." This reference suggests a complex dynamic among the three killers' intellectual rivalry, familial bonds, and shared devotion to their twisted philosophy. It raises the disturbing possibility that E may have continued their work even after the cousins themselves had died or been apprehended elsewhere. Could the elderly woman detained in Portland in 1959 truly have been the same person mentioned in the journal 50 years earlier? If so, she would have been carrying the Carters' legacy well into the modern era. In 1957, a retired librarian from Enid, Oklahoma, came forward with an account that added another layer to the Carter mystery. Mabel Whitmore claimed that, in 1910, a woman matching E's limited description had applied for a position as a schoolteacher in a rural district outside Enid. She was educated and well-spoken, Whitmore recalled, but there was something unsettling about her. She asked the strangest questions about the children, not about their academic abilities, but about their souls, their awareness of mortality. She seemed particularly interested in whether any of them had experienced near-death situations or had lost parents. According to Whitmore, the woman was not hired, largely due to these unusual inquiries, which the school board found inappropriate. She stayed in Enid for less than a week before moving on. Whether this woman was indeed the E mentioned in the journal cannot be confirmed, but the timing and the philosophical preoccupations align with what we know of the Carter family's interests. The possibility that the Carters might have targeted children is not supported by the evidence found at the Pawnee County farmhouse. All victims discovered there were adult males. However, the journal makes several references to subjects of varying ages at their previous locations. A passage from early 1908, apparently written while the cousins were still in Missouri, reads, "The youngest subject proved disappointing. Samuel believes the soul of a child departs too quickly, too eagerly for proper observation. I am not convinced. But for now, we shall focus on mature subjects whose souls have accumulated more experience and may therefore demonstrate more complex transitions." This passage, chilling in its clinical detachment, suggests that at least one child may have fallen victim to the Carters before they arrived in Oklahoma. However, no specific cases of child disappearances have been definitively linked to them, and this remains one of the many unanswered questions surrounding the case. The journal found in the chimney of the Carter place represents only a portion of what Elias Carter apparently wrote. Several entries refer to previous volumes and to a more comprehensive treatise that would compile all their findings. In one entry from March 1910, he wrote, "The treatise now exceeds 300 pages. When complete, it will stand as the definitive work on transition observation, though I harbor no illusions about its reception in my lifetime. Future generations, perhaps, will recognize its value once society advances beyond its current moral." Limitations. No trace of this larger work has ever been found. Did it travel west with the cousins? Was it destroyed? Or could it still exist somewhere, passed down through unknown channels to those who might share the Carters' distorted worldview? The possibility, however remote, that such a document might serve as inspiration to others with similar inclinations remains one of the more disturbing aspects of the case. In 1982, a package arrived at the Pawnee County Sheriff's Office, addressed to the custodian of the Carter records. Inside was a single page that appeared to have been torn from a book containing a passage about the relationship between body and soul that closely matched the philosophy described in Elias Carter's journal. A note accompanying the page read simply, "The work continues." Handwriting analysis was inconclusive, though experts noted similarities to the writing in the original journal. The postmark indicated the package had been mailed from Seattle, but no sender information was included, and no further communications were received. This incident, occurring more than 70 years after the Carters fled Oklahoma, suggests the disturbing possibility that someone, whether a family member, a disciple, or merely a true crime enthusiast with a macabre sense of humor, was keeping the memory of the Carter philosophy alive. It raises questions about the long shadow cast by such cases and the potential for twisted ideas to find new adherents long after their originators have passed from the scene. Today, the Carter case exists primarily as a footnote in the history of American crime, less famous than the killings of H.H.A.